Okay guys, in today's video we're going to be taking another look at Vechain to see what's been happening with the price action of VET. As we get into this video guys, if you do find it useful and informative, go ahead and hit that like button. I really do appreciate it. If you're new, make sure you've subscribed, hit the bell, tapped on all, and you won't miss another Vechain update guys. With that said, done and out of the way, let's get into Vechain and see what's going on here with VET. Right, so we're going to start things off with Vechain against the USDT. This is the weekly chart and Binance is the data source. Now here is a couple of things that we really do want to kind of point out, as we usually do, is to make everyone aware of where we are heading in the second half of this year as we close Q3, go into Q4, and of course start 2022. Now with this, on this weekly chart, we have the Elliott theory, 5 impulse waves to the upside. We have one just down here. This actually started in March of 2020, where it peaked out up in August. I think anyone who was invested in Vechain back in August of 2020 will know exactly how good it was to see these new all-time highs getting set for this particular coin. We obviously started to go into correction wave 2, which actually kind of bottomed out down here in the November time of 2020. This was a correction wave that basically saw us come back down to the previous resistance areas for Vechain, right? So we bounced off this area here, and that really did kickstart wave 3. Now wave 3 was obviously again where we started seeing some new all-time highs get set time and time and time again. It was fantastic, but again, all of these scenarios, when we are pushing back up into these higher areas, we do have to expect natural pullbacks, right? And we actually peaked in I think it was April of 2021 for the all-time high, and then we started the correction wave for correction wave 4. Now correction wave 4 ultimately has been a little bit larger than we would normally anticipate. Normally a correction wave within this Elliott theory would be a 40% move. We've actually seen it a little bit overextended on that, but it's still perfectly fine, and it has actually aligned quite nicely with some of the other technical things that we've been seeing in the data. So again, this went into the buy zone most recently. We got into this yellow area down here where we were accumulating before we go into this fifth wave up here. So for Vechain, it's been performing quite well, and we've seen a bit of a reversal now and a bit of a break of a trend as we continue now to get into or start to go into the fifth wave. The other thing that's also worth pointing out on this weekly chart is that stochastic relative strength index. As we've been talking about this most recently, when so many people were calling for Bitcoin to drop down to 20k, we obviously were referencing the stochastic relative strength index to basically indicate to people that it's very unlikely that we are to go down any lower. In fact, we're going to go up if anything, and if we are to expect newer lows to be set, then first of all we have to anticipate the price to move up, and in order to correct our stochastic relative strength index and allow it to then drop back down. So right now for Vechain, I'm just going to point out a couple of real key consistent points that really hit home when we actually break it down with our charts. So obviously during the crash of March of 2020, we saw that Vechain was all the way down at a really low area. And I mean low not just in price, but also on the stochastic relative strength index. On the stochastic, we got down all the way here to absolute 0, the lowest it can be. Anything below 20 is oversold, and we took Vechain all the way down to 0. Okay, so obviously during this March crash of 2020, it was significantly the bottom area for Vechain. And obviously we started to go into this wave 1 scenario where we topped out, right? And we actually took this all the way up to 99.8. So again, overbought. Anything over 80 is overbought. So we knew that a correction was going to come in. We saw this correction, and we saw again coming down to this low area here, the previous resistance area. We also saw Vechain drop down to 0.4 and basically start to slowly get a recovery. So right now we obviously had an area that's heavily oversold all the way down there at 0 once again, right? So obviously matching that scenario where we were during the crash of March 2020, during November we also saw the same levels of that stochastic relative strength index get hit. That meant that we were going to be ushering in this third wave to the upside, and again this was actually slightly overextended and actually prolonged, and I felt it was down to the Wyckoff redistribution on Bitcoin sustaining this third wave for a bit longer. But we did see some really interesting things happen here with the stochastic relative strength index. On this stochastic, we did see that we went all the way up here to 100, slight pullback for 1 week. that got things corrected. We lost a little bit of momentum even though we were pushing the price up, only to go up back into this overbought area before we went into this fourth wave correction. This fourth wave correction again has seen the stochastic relative strength index drop all the way down to 1. So we know that ultimately dropping all the way back down into these really low areas of basically being 1, anything over or under 20 is obviously oversold. We've seen previously down here at 0.4 or absolute 0, a level of 1 is sufficiently oversold. And to think that VeChain is going to then drop down lower is very unrealistic without first of all increasing our stochastic relative strength index first, right? So what we're looking for now is knowing the consistencies between these low points with wave 1, the low here on the wave 2, and where we are right now with wave 4. The expectations are that this stochastic relative strength index is going to increase to the upside as we increase the price and push up into that fifth wave as we complete this bull run. So again, we've been very bullish pretty much from the outset, as we've seen data that is indicating that we are pushing to the upside on the bigger picture. We don't get bogged down as investors on those hourly charts or those daily charts when we have true vision on the weekly or the monthly. So right now, this weekly chart is looking very, very good for VeChain and the expectations of where VeChain is likely to go in the second half of this year as we close off Q3, go into Q4, and of course, usher in 2022. For many people in the space that are still anticipating the peak of the bull run to be around March of 2022. Again, timing is the hardest thing to gauge, but the expectations for Bitcoin's all-time high would pretty much come in towards the end of the year around December time. And if that does happen again, as in previous cycles, then the expectations would be for many of these altcoins to also start achieving their final all-time highs towards basically end of December, January, and potentially some of them actually get delayed till February and March. So again, obviously review the data and see how things are progressing, but this weekly chart is lining up nicely. So let's jump down into our daily view, right? Because here we can actually see some of these moves in a little bit more detail. We obviously do have a downward trend here, an upward trend as well on our VeChain chart, and we obviously saw this breakout. Now, what's really important about this particular downward trend and upward trend where they cross and intersect, they corresponded to the 21st of July. Now, this is not just a VeChain specific thing. We saw on many charts, many different altcoins, and including Bitcoin, that the 21st of July was a very significant date. I didn't know why, but all the charts were very much aligning. You can call that manipulation, coincidence, or whatever. But ultimately, what we saw was the 21st, where expectation was something was going to happen. And considering the positioning on most of the charts at that time being oversold weekly, daily, hourly, the chances were that come on the 31st here, we were going to have a break to the upside. And that's exactly what we saw with Bitcoin and we'll continue to see with Bitcoin right now. The last 2 days for VeChain have been slightly red, but as you can see, we are overbought and we're looking to kind of get this daily stochastic relative strength index pulled back down into a pretty reasonable area. This being said, though, we can sustain a stochastic relative strength index reasonably high for a period of time. And of course, we can increase the price of VeChain whilst reducing our stochastic relative strength index if the momentum drops accordingly. So right now, things are looking pretty interesting here on this daily, and it gets really interesting when we actually start to talk about where that fifth wave expectations are. For quite a period of time, we've been talking about VeChain hitting this magical $1 level, and this is now backed up within the technicals. In fact, it's been backed up for quite some time. Since we set the high up here in April of 2021, and we started to see the lows that were getting set down here in May, we were actually able to predict the Fibonacci extension levels of the 1.618, the 2.618, the 3.618, and of course that 4.236. And that 4.236 is indicating $1.01, and that lines up nicely with our fifth wave expectations. So right now, a $1 VeChain is being technically possible here on the charts, which is fantastic to see. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to jump down into our hourly view and we're going to talk about what's going on here because some interesting sideways trades have been occurring. Right now, we can obviously see that Bitcoin and many of these altcoins have started to try to trade sideways. And this is because we are oversold on our weekly chart and we are overbought on our daily chart. and our hourly chart is not aligned to either of them just yet, right? So we can take a look at this. We can see that our stochastic relative strength index is at 32 as we now get a reversal of a green candle pushing up. As we said previously on the stream yesterday for VeChain, what we're looking for is basically to continue trading in kind of in this area here between 9.2 cent and 8.3. And in doing this, and in doing this sideways trade for a period of time, what we're likely to do is actually get our daily stochastic relative strength index corrected and pulled down to a more reasonable area. And in doing that, will then allow us to continue the motion to the upside. Right now, we are kind of stuck between being oversold on a weekly chart and overbought on a daily chart, and our hourly chart is basically just bouncing between key levels until one of those charts finally gets corrected. There's a higher probability that our daily chart is going to get corrected before our weekly chart, and this is just testament to the fact that it takes 7 days to basically form one candle within our weekly. So right now we obviously have to understand how our hourly chart is working. Now, obviously, a stochastic relative strength index works best when you kind of pair it up with some other elements or some other indicators. So with volume paired with this, we can see what's been going on. There was a reasonable amount of volume really coming in here, pushing the price up initially, and obviously a large volume pulled it back down. So obviously we breached that 8.3 cent area. We held it for support briefly, but ultimately selling pressure built too highly, and that pulled us right the way down. Now, what you can see here is that we were barely out of this oversold area before that volume came in and pulled it down into an absolute zero area down here and oversold. Then we've obviously got this fantastic recovery because there's nowhere else to go but up. And then obviously trying to hold the 8.3 cent just hasn't worked for us, which is why we've been hovering around here with 8.3 currently being a resistance line for us. The volumes have also dropped right back. So the sentiment's an interesting piece, right? Because again, we take a look at the generalized fear and greed index. And this is basically saying that the crypto market sentiment analysis is neutral. It is neither fearful and it is neither greedy, right? It is basically just in middle. It's a bit meh, right? It's not doing too much. So with knowing that the generalized fear and greed index, it's also quite important that we dive into the 𝗖𝗢 dashboard and actually take a look at VeChain independently, right? And we take a look at this unbiased machine approach, right? This artificial intelligence has basically taken all the VeChain data and then said, okay, well, actually, the fear and greed index is at a B3 rating. I would say this is actually entering the world of greedy. It's not quite greed or greedy or anything like that. It's somewhere in there, right? It's not neutral. I feel a neutral is going to be something like a C1 to B3. I think it's somewhere in that kind of area. So it's very much aligned to what we're seeing here when it comes to that generalized fear and greed index. It's pretty much aligned to that kind of thinking. The other issues that we'd have on the VeChain technicals here from an 𝗖𝗢 dashboard perspective is the Sharpe ratio. The Sharpe ratio still has a lot of recovery still to come, and we're looking to get this recovered. And what we want to see is that 50-day average actually drop below our green line here. So we're waiting for that to kind of come in, and obviously the risk to rewards until that happens is slightly higher. But that being said, there's very few projects that do as much as VeChain. So from a long-term hodl and an investor's mindset, although the Sharpe ratio is obviously a bit of a concern, it is not putting me off investing in VeChain or hodling for the long term, because there's not many blockchains that do as much as VeChain does fundamentally. So the technicals might be indicating problematic areas right now, but ultimately I think long term and VeChain is going to be okay. The profitability and the return on investment, though, is the best it can be, up at an A1 rating. So although there are some immediate risks to rewards right now, the profitability still remains as the best rating that this artificial intelligence can give. Therefore, from a return on investment, it's still a fantastic opportunity. With that being said, the peak end value demand is at B2, so slightly lower than that of the profitability and the ROI. Of course, B3 is the generalized rating that 𝗖𝗢 has given VeChain. So basically, that artificial intelligence has taken a look at everything. It's taken a look at all of the technicals, and then has applied a general weighted rating to a VeChain. And it's actually gone up today, guys. It's gone up from the C1 rating up to a B3 rating. So that's a positive change for VeChain. So let's jump back into our charts. And obviously, we've spoken a lot around what that weekly chart is looking like. We've spoken a lot around that stochastic relative strength index, how our weekly is not aligned to our daily, and how our hourly is not aligned to our daily either, and why we think we're still going to be in these sideways trades. The other thing that's also worth noting is there's going to be some trend lines that are appearing here. We're going to put these on the chart so we can see what these look like. But ultimately, the expectations might be that actually we end up with a bit of a triangular wedge forming. We'll monitor these on the hourly. They're not the most accurate, so I like to avoid using them where I can. But I'm also mindful that sometimes these triangular wedges play really nicely into our strengths. So on this particular occasion here, there's a couple of things, right? We obviously have that downward trend, but there's an upward trend, but we also have this support line or resistance line. So we have a triangular wedge forming just here inside this, and if that's going to be a big trigger to a breakout, that would be fantastic. And of course we have this other narrowing wedge right here, right? So we can obviously see that happening regardless of our trend, our support and resistance line. So ultimately these trend lines are going to be interesting. I don't think they're going to hold per self because they're hourly, they're not necessarily the strongest, but I will keep them there for now to see how they get on. The other thing that's also worth just kind of taking a look at are going to be those Bollinger Bands. That we take the volumes off, throw the Bollinger Bands on, and here we can see that we're getting tighted, right? We're basically getting stuck into a bit of a triangular wedge, obviously, but also those bands are also narrowing down. And what we're looking to do is get above the midway point, test this upper band here, and again this could be an interesting breakout scenario. So as we saw down here when we saw this channel kind of formed, we got narrowed in here and we've got above the midway point and then we broke to the upside, right? And again when we're over here we broke below this, we got into this wedge here and then we broke down before breaking up. So for VeChain, things are looking pretty interesting on these Bollinger Bands, in line with our stochastic relative strength index on this kind of element and this kind of side of things. The Bollinger Bands are indicating that we are likely to kind of get narrowed into this wedge a little bit more, and we want to be getting above that midway band before we can really have a good strong breakout there. So for everything on VeChain's side of things, on the hourly and the daily, it's always good to know what's likely to come, prepare ourselves mentally, understand where our buy the dip scenarios might be, if there's any good positions to be dollar cost averaging into. Otherwise, for me, I like to really keep focus on that weekly, understand what the bigger picture is, where we are likely to go. And as I said, there's very few projects doing as much as VeChain. There's only one 5-star rated blockchain service provider in the world, that is VeChain. And everything else that they are doing heavily integrated with some absolute behemoth companies around the globe. This is a project that I feel has some serious potential. So guys, hopefully you have found this video on VeChain useful and informative. If you have, hit the like button. I really appreciate that. If you're new, make sure you've subscribed, hit the bell, tapped on all, and you won't miss another VeChain update. Guys, with this said, done, and out of the way, I hope everyone has a fantastic day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.